The smell of leather and tobacco hit Zelda Reed's senses just before everything went dark. The wooden floorboards of Morrison's general store rushing up to meet her face as her knees buckled beneath her weight on that sweltering August afternoon in 1878. Lucas Jensen had been standing near the counter, discussing cattle prices with old man Morrison, when he heard the distinct sound of a body hitting the floor. He turned just in time to see a young woman crumpled in a heap near the sacks of flour, her faded blue dress spread around her like wilted petals. Without hesitation, he crossed the store in 3 long strides and knelt beside her, his calloused hands gentle as he turned her onto her back. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that calmed spooked horses and frightened children. But the woman didn't respond. Her face was pale beneath the dust on her cheeks, and her lips were cracked and dry. Lucas noticed how thin she was, how her collarbones jutted out beneath the worn fabric of her dress, how her wrists looked like they might snap if he held them too tightly. Morrison hurried over, his considerable belly preceding him. "That's the Reed girl. Lives in that old shack about 2 miles west of town with her aunt. Or she did. Heard the aunt passed on about a month back." Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. A month alone, probably without money or food. He'd seen it before, pride keeping people from asking for help until it was almost too late. "Get me some water and whatever food you can spare," he told Morrison, his tone brooking no argument. The storekeeper hesitated. "Now, Lucas, I run a business here. Can't just be giving away merchandise to every person who comes through that door without paying." Lucas fixed him with a look that had made grown men reconsider their choices on more than one occasion. "Put it on my account then, and be quick about it." While Morrison grumbled his way toward the back of the store, Lucas carefully scooped the unconscious woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, light as a child despite being clearly a grown woman. He could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her dress. His jaw clenched with anger, not at her but at circumstances that could leave someone in such a state. Morrison returned with a canteen and some hardtack wrapped in brown paper. "Where are you taking her?" "My place. She needs food and rest, and I doubt that shack of hers has either." Lucas adjusted his hold on her, cradling her head against his shoulder as he headed toward the door. "People will talk," Morrison warned, his tone carrying the weight of small-town gossip. "Let them." Lucas didn't slow his stride as he pushed through the door with his shoulder, stepping out into the bright Arizona sunshine. Prescott was his home, had been for the better part of 5 years since he'd bought his ranch on the outskirts of town, but he'd never been one to worry over much about what the townspeople thought of him. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Maple, stood patiently at the hitching post. Getting into the saddle while holding an unconscious woman took some maneuvering, but Lucas had spent most of his 30 years doing difficult things. He settled her across his lap, one arm securely around her waist, and urged Maple into a careful walk. The ride to his ranch took 20 minutes, and halfway there the woman stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of dark honey. For a moment she seemed confused, her gaze unfocused as she tried to make sense of her situation. "Easy now," Lucas said, his voice gentle. "You fainted back at Morrison's store. I'm taking you somewhere safe." Panic flashed across her face and she tensed in his arms. "Put me down. I don't need your help. I can walk." "I'm sure you think you can, but you'd likely make it about 10 feet before you fell flat on your face again." There was no judgment in his tone, just simple fact. "When was the last time you ate?" She turned her face away from him, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "I don't see how that's any of your concern. It became my concern when you hit my boots on your way down to that floor." He felt her stiffen at his words, pride radiating from her thin frame. I'm Lucas Jensen. I've got a ranch just ahead. You can rest there, get some food in you, and then we can figure out what comes next. I don't need charity." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but he heard the steel beneath it. "Good. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering basic human decency, and there's a difference." He glanced down at her, noting the way she held herself despite her obvious weakness. "What's your name?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Finally, she said, "Zelda Reed." "Well, Miss Reed, pleased to make your acquaintance, even if the circumstances aren't ideal." He could see his ranch house now, a sturdy structure of wood and stone that he'd built mostly with his own two hands. The barn stood behind it, freshly painted red last spring, and his small herd of cattle dotted the pastures beyond. Zelda took in the sight with obvious surprise. Whatever she'd been expecting, it clearly wasn't this. Most cowboys were drifters, working for wages on someone else's land. A man who owned his own spread was different, more settled, more substantial. Lucas dismounted carefully, managing to keep his hold on her despite her half-hearted attempts to stand on her own. "I can walk," she insisted again, but her voice lacked conviction. "Humor me." He carried her up the 3 steps to his front porch and shouldered open the door. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table with 4 chairs occupying the center of the main room. A door to the left led to his bedroom, and a small kitchen area occupied the back. He set her down gently in one of the chairs and immediately went to the kitchen, pumping water into a tin cup and bringing it to her. She took it with trembling hands and drank like someone who'd been lost in the desert for days. He had to stop her from draining the whole thing too fast. "Slow down. Your stomach needs to remember what water is before you drown it." He went back to the kitchen and started pulling out ingredients. Soup would be best, something easy to digest. He had beef stock from last week, some vegetables from the garden, bread that was only a day old. Zelda watched him move around the kitchen with growing confusion. "You cook?" He glanced at her with something that might have been amusement. "I live alone. The choices were learn to cook or starve, and I'm too stubborn to starve." He set a pot on the stove and started building a fire. "Besides, my mother would come back and haunt me if I let my kitchen skills get rusty. She was very particular about such things." "Was?" The word came out soft, tentative. "Died when I was 17. Fever took her one winter." He said it matter-of-factly, the way you talk about old wounds that have healed but left scars. "My father followed her about 6 months later. Broken heart," the doctor said, but I think it was more that he just didn't see the point in going on without her. Zelda was quiet, her fingers wrapped around the tin cup. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." He added vegetables to the pot, the knife moving efficiently through carrots and onions. "Morrison said your aunt passed recently." Her shoulders tensed. "About 5 weeks ago. She had a bad cough that turned into something worse. By the time I convinced her to let me ride for the doctor, it was too late. And you've been alone since then." "It wasn't a question. I can manage." But even as she said it, her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that echoed in the quiet house. Lucas didn't comment on it directly. "The soup will be ready in about half an hour. In the meantime, there's bread in that box there and butter in the cold cellar. Don't eat too much too fast, or you'll just make yourself sick." She hesitated, pride warring with desperate hunger, and then finally reached for the bread. Her hands shook as she tore off a piece and spread butter on it with painstaking care. The first bite made her close her eyes, a sound of pure relief escaping her throat. Lucas busied himself with the soup, giving her privacy to eat without being watched. He'd seen proud people before, understood how hard it was to accept help when you'd been taught to stand on your own 2 feet. But pride was cold comfort when you were starving. "Why are you doing this?" Zelda asked suddenly. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." He stirred the soup, considering his answer. "My father once told me that the measure of a man isn't in how much land he owns or how many cattle he runs. It's in what he does when he sees someone in need. You needed help. I was there. It's as simple as that. Things are rarely simple. Maybe not, but this is." He tasted the soup, added a pinch more salt. "You can stay here until you get your strength back. I've got a spare room that's not being used for much besides storage. It's yours if you want it." "I can't do that. It wouldn't be proper." But her voice held a note of longing, of someone who desperately wanted to say yes but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. "Proper went out the window the moment I carried you out of Morrison's store. By now, half the town probably thinks I've compromised your virtue just by touching you." He ladled soup into a bowl and brought it to the table, setting it in front of her along with a spoon. "But I figure your virtue will survive my cooking, and you're welcome to the spare room for as long as you need it. No strings, no expectations. Just a safe place to rest and regular meals until you're back on your feet." Zelda stared at the soup like it was a mirage that might disappear if she looked away. Steam rose from the bowl, carrying the rich scent of beef and vegetables. Her eyes were suddenly wet with unshed tears. "Hey now," Lucas said, his voice gone gentle. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "None of that, it's just soup." "It's not just soup." She swiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's kindness, and I haven't had much of that lately." "Then maybe you're overdue for some." He waited until she picked up the spoon and took her first careful bite. The expression that crossed her face was something between ecstasy and pain, as if remembering what food tasted like hurt as much as it helped. They sat in companionable silence while she ate, Lucas nursing a cup of coffee and watching the light change through the window. The afternoon was wearing on toward evening, shadows growing long across the yard. He'd need to see to the animals soon, check the barn, make sure everything was secure for the night. "I had a job," Zelda said suddenly, breaking the silence. "At the schoolhouse. I was supposed to start teaching this fall. But after Aunt Margaret died, the school board decided I wasn't suitable anymore. Said it wouldn't look right. A young, unmarried woman living alone." The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. "Never mind that I'm 22 years old and perfectly capable of looking after myself. Never mind that I spent 3 years studying to be a teacher." Lucas felt that anger stir in his chest again. "That's a damn shame. Pardon my language. I've heard worse." She took another spoonful of soup. "I've been trying to sell the house, but it's not worth much, and nobody wants to buy it. I thought maybe I could find work somewhere, but there's not much call for women who can read Latin and do arithmetic. The respectable jobs require references I don't have, and the other kind, well." She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. "What about family? Anyone who could help?" She shook her head. "My parents died when I was 12. Yellow fever. Aunt Margaret was my mother's older sister. She took me in when no one else would, raised me like her own daughter. Scraped together money she didn't have to send me to school, to give me opportunities she never had." Her voice thickened. "And I couldn't even save her. Sickness doesn't care about one or try. It takes who it takes, and there's not much any of us can do about it except keep living and try to make something good out of the time we have left." Lucas stood up, collecting his coffee cup. "You finish that soup and have more if you want it. I need to see to the animals before it gets dark. We can talk more after." He left her there at his table, stepped out into the cooling evening air. The sky was turning shades of pink and gold, the way it did in late summer, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Lucas walked to the barn, his mind working through possibilities. The truth was, he could use help around the ranch. He'd been managing on his own for years, but there was always more work than hours in the day. He wasn't suggesting anything improper, just practical. She could earn her keep, save up money for a fresh start somewhere else if that's what she wanted. Or maybe she'd want to stay. Prescott was growing, new people arriving all the time. Surely there'd be opportunities for a woman with her education. He was getting ahead of himself, he knew. She'd barely agreed to stay for a meal, let alone anything more permanent. But something about Zelda Reed had gotten under his skin in the short time since he'd picked her up off Morrison's floor. Maybe it was the steel in her spine despite her circumstances. Maybe it was the way she tried to walk away even when she could barely stand. Or maybe it was something simpler, something he didn't want to name yet. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and horses. He had 3 horses besides Maple, a pair of workhorses for heavy pulling and a young stallion he was training. They nickered at his approach, hoping for treats. He obliged them with some carrots from the garden, checked their water, made sure the chickens were secure in their coop. By the time he returned to the house, full darkness had fallen. Through the window he could see lamplight, warm and golden. When he stepped inside, he found Zelda washing the dishes at the pump, her movements careful and deliberate. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She glanced over her shoulder at him. "I may be accepting your hospitality, but I'm not an invalid. I can contribute something." "Fair enough." He hung his hat on the peg by the door. "Let me show you the spare room." He led her through the main room to a door on the right side of the house. The room beyond was small but tidy, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the eastern hills. He'd been using it to store extra tack and supplies, but most of that could be moved to the barn. "I'll clear this out tomorrow. The sheets on the bed are clean. I change them regular even though nobody uses the room. On account of my mother always said a house should be ready for guests, even if you're not expecting any." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware of how intimate this was, showing a woman to a bedroom in his house. "The door has a lock on the inside. You can use it if it makes you feel safer." Zelda walked to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. "Why are you really doing this, Lucas?" He considered lying or offering some platitude, but she deserved better than that. "Because when I saw you on that floor, I saw someone who'd been dealt a rough hand but was still fighting, and I respect that. Because I've got space and food to spare, and you need both. Because in this world, we don't get many chances to do something decent, and I figured this was mine." He paused. "And maybe because you remind me a little of myself, a long time ago before I had all this. I know what it's like to be alone and struggling and too proud to ask for help." She turned to face him, the lamplight catching in her dark hair. "I can work. Whatever you need done around here, I can learn. We can talk about that tomorrow. Tonight you should rest, build your strength back up." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Zelda, you don't have to decide anything right now, just take it one day at a time." After he closed the door behind him, he stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the quiet sounds of her moving around the room. Then he went to his own bedroom, suddenly aware of how empty his house had felt before tonight, and how different it seemed now with someone else in it. Sleep was a long time coming. The next morning, Lucas woke before dawn as usual, dressed quietly, and headed to the barn to start his chores. He'd mucked out 3 stalls before he heard the front door of the house open and close. When he looked out, he saw Zelda standing on the porch, wearing the same dress as yesterday but with her hair pulled back in a practical braid. She spotted him and walked over, moving with more steadiness than she'd had the day before. "Good morning." "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Better." "Stronger." She looked around at the ranch, taking in details she'd missed yesterday. "What needs doing?" He leaned the pitchfork against the wall. "You sure you're up for work already?" I'm sure I'll go crazy if I have to sit still all day. Put me to use, Lucas, please." There was something in her voice, a need to prove herself to be useful rather than merely a burden. He understood that. "All right, can you handle chickens? I grew up on a farm before my parents died. I can handle chickens." He showed her where the feed was kept, how many eggs to expect, which hens were broody and which were reliable layers. She listened attentively, asked smart questions, and set to work with the kind of focused determination he recognized in himself. They fell into an easy rhythm over the following days. Zelda proved to be as capable as she'd claimed, tackling whatever task he gave her with quiet efficiency. She gathered eggs, weeded the garden, helped him mend fences. In the evenings, she cooked while he finished the outdoor work, and they'd eat together at the table, conversation flowing more easily each night. Lucas learned that she loved to read but hadn't owned a book since her aunt died, had sold them all to buy food. He rode into town the next day and came back with 3 novels from the general store, claiming he'd bought them before remembering he was a terrible reader. The look on her face when he handed them to her was worth twice what he'd paid. She learned that he'd fought in the last year of the war, on the Union side, and had come west afterward looking for a fresh start. That he loved his ranch but sometimes felt the loneliness of it pressing down on him like a physical weight. That he'd been engaged once, years ago, to a girl back in Kansas, but she'd married someone else while he was away fighting. "Did it break your heart?" Zelda asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "At the time, I thought it did. Looking back, I think it bruised my pride more than anything." He stretched his legs out, boots crossing at the ankle. "We were young, barely knew each other really. I was in love with the idea of her more than the actual person. And since then, no one. There have been women here and there. Nothing serious. Nothing that lasted." He glanced at her. "What about you?" She shook her head. "Aunt Margaret was protective, and then I was away at school and the boys there were more interested in girls with money and prospects. A charity case with a borrowed dress didn't rate much attention." "Their loss," Lucas said, and meant it. Something shifted between them after that conversation. The air felt different when they were together, charged with possibility. Lucas found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, noticing the way sunlight caught in her hair, how her rare smiles transformed her entire face. He noticed when she started putting on weight, her cheeks filling out, her movements becoming less fragile. Zelda felt it too, the way her heart quickened when he came in from the fields, how aware she was of his presence across the table. She'd catch herself thinking about him while she worked, wondering what he was doing when he'd be back. It was dangerous and thrilling and terrifying all at once. 3 weeks after that first day, Lucas found her in the barn attempting to lift a saddle that was clearly too heavy for her. He crossed the space in quick strides and took it from her hands, their fingers brushing in the transfer. The contact sent electricity through both of them. "You should have waited for me," he said, but his voice had gone rough. "I thought I could manage." She was looking up at him, close enough that he could see flecks of green in her amber eyes. "Zelda." Her name came out like a prayer and a curse combined. "I need to tell you something." "All right." He set the saddle down on the rail, then turned to face her fully. "When I brought you here, my intentions were purely decent. I wanted to help someone in need, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, things changed for me. You changed things for me." He took a breath. "I find myself looking forward to meals because you'll be there. I come in from working earlier than I need to just so I can see you sooner. I lie awake at night thinking about you sleeping in the next room, and it's driving me half crazy." Her breath caught. "Lucas, I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable or to put pressure on you. You can stay here for as long as you need, whether you feel the same or not. I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." He rubbed his jaw, suddenly uncertain. "If I've made things awkward, I apologize." "You haven't." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. "You haven't made things awkward because I feel it too. I have for a while now." His heart, which had been racing, seemed to stop altogether. "You do, I do." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I tried not to. Tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, or that I was fooling myself, or that you couldn't possibly see me as anything other than some charity case you picked up off the floor. But the truth is, Lucas, when I'm with you, I feel more myself than I have in years. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You treat me like an equal, not like some fragile thing to be managed." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. Her skin was soft beneath his calloused palm. "You're the furthest thing from fragile I've ever met. You're strong and smart and beautiful, and I'd be honored if you'd let me court you properly." "Court me?" A smile tugged at her lips. "We're living in the same house. I think we've moved a bit beyond traditional courtship. Then we'll make our own tradition." He leaned down slowly, watching her eyes for any sign of hesitation. When he found none, when she tilted her face up toward his, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. But when she made a soft sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer to him, the kiss deepened. His arms came around her waist, and hers slid up to circle his neck, and for a perfect moment, the world consisted of nothing but the two of them and this connection that had been building for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zelda rested her forehead against his chest. "Well," she said, her voice shaky, "that was worth the wait." Lucas laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You've been waiting, have you? Hoping, more like." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "I wasn't sure if you saw me that way." "I see you, Zelda, all of you. And I like everything I see." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "We should probably head back to the house before I get too carried away in this barn." "Would that be so terrible?" he groaned. "You're going to be the death of me, woman." But he was smiling as he said it, and he kept his arm around her waist as they walked back to the house together. That night, they sat on the porch again, but this time Zelda was tucked against Lucas's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. They talked about the future, carefully feeling their way through what this meant, where it might lead. "I want you to know," Lucas said, "I don't expect anything from you just because you're staying here. This thing between us, it moves at whatever pace you're comfortable with. I know." She traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "You've been nothing but respectful, but Lucas, I'm not made of glass. I won't break if you kiss me again." He did, thoroughly, until they were both flushed and breathless. "I care about you," he said against her lips. "More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. I care about you too." She kissed him again, softer this time. "It scares me a little how much. Scares me too." He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, but I think the best things usually do. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Lucas took her into town, let the gossip see them together, making it clear through his actions that Zelda Reed was under his protection and his courtship was serious. Some people whispered, of course. There were always those who found fault in anything unconventional. But Lucas had friends in Prescott too, good people who saw how happy he was and welcomed Zelda accordingly. The town doctor's wife, Martha Sullivan, took a particular shine to Zelda. She invited her to the ladies' afternoon gatherings, where Zelda's education and quick wit won over the other women. Within a month, she was teaching reading lessons to some of the children whose families couldn't afford regular schooling, using Lucas's porch as a makeshift classroom twice a week. "You're doing it anyway," Lucas observed one afternoon, watching her work with 3 youngsters on their letters. Teaching, I mean, even after they said you weren't suitable. Zelda looked up from the slate she was examining. I suppose I am, though this time nobody can tell me to stop. Damn right they can't. He was proud of her, proud of how she'd carved out a place for herself in his world, in his community. In October, Lucas found himself standing in Morrison's general store, looking at a display of rings the merchant had ordered from back east. His heart hammered in his chest as he examined a simple gold band with a small diamond set in the center. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest and real, like Zelda herself. That one's a fine choice, Morrison said, appearing at his elbow. Planning something special, maybe. Lucas turned the ring over in his fingers. You think she'll say yes? Morrison's weathered face split into a grin. Son, that girl looks at you like you hung the moon. If she says anything but yes, I'll eat my hat. Lucas bought the ring and carried it home in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. That moment came 3 days later, on a crisp autumn evening when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. He'd taken Zelda riding, up into the hills where you could see the ranch spread out below like a patchwork quilt. They dismounted near a small stream, letting the horses drink while they sat on a fallen log and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of fire. I love this place, Zelda said softly. I can see why you chose to make your life here. It's a good place, a peaceful place. He turned to look at her. But it's been better since you've been in it. Everything's been better. She smiled, that full, genuine smile that made his chest ache. I feel the same way. Zelda. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've turned my house into a home. You've made me remember what it feels like to want to share everything with someone, the good and the bad, the ordinary and the extraordinary. Her eyes had gone wide, her breath catching as she seemed to realize where this was heading. He slid off the log and onto one knee, still holding her hand. I don't have much to offer except a ranch that needs work, a house that's seen better days, and a heart that's completely, irrevocably yours. But if you'll have me, Zelda Reed, if you'll take a chance on spending your life with a stubborn cowboy, I promise I'll do everything in my power to make you happy. Will you marry me? He pulled the ring from his pocket with his free hand, holding it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. Tears were streaming down Zelda's face, but she was smiling. Yes, yes, Lucas, of course I'll marry you. I love you. I've loved you for weeks now, maybe longer. You love me. His voice cracked on the words. I love you. She cupped his face in her hands. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see the best in people. I love how you fixed my whole life without ever making me feel small or dependent. I love you, Lucas Jensen, with everything I am. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her down to him for a kiss that tasted of salt from her tears and joy from both of them. They stayed like that until the sun finished setting and the first stars appeared, holding each other and talking about their future, making plans. They were married 6 weeks later, in November of 1878, in the small church at the center of Prescott. Martha Sullivan helped Zelda make a dress from cream-colored silk that Lucas had ordered special from Santa Fe. It was the most beautiful thing Zelda had ever owned, simple and elegant, with tiny buttons down the back and lace at the collar and cuffs. Lucas wore his best suit, dark wool that made his eyes look even bluer than usual. When Zelda walked down the aisle on the arm of Dr. Sullivan, who'd graciously agreed to stand in as her father, Lucas felt his throat close up with emotion. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her, and the fact that she'd chosen him, that she loved him, felt like a miracle he didn't quite deserve but would spend every day trying to earn. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in steady voices, slipped rings onto each other's fingers, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed his bride with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance had to wipe their eyes. The reception was held in the town hall, with food provided by various families in the community. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Lucas danced with his wife, holding her close, still hardly believing she was his. "Happy," he murmured against her ear, deliriously. She pulled back to look at him. "This morning I woke up as Zelda Reed, alone in the world. Tonight I'll sleep as Zelda Jensen, with a husband and a home and a future. It's almost too much happiness to hold." "Then we'll hold it together," he kissed her forehead. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Sharing the burdens and the joys, the ordinary and the extraordinary." They stayed at the party until late, accepting congratulations and well wishes from the townspeople who'd come to be their friends. Even Morrison, who'd been skeptical at first, gave them a generous gift of supplies for the ranch and told Lucas he'd done well for himself. Finally, as midnight approached, they rode back to the ranch together. Lucas had borrowed a small wagon and decorated it with ribbons, making Zelda laugh at the sight of his practical farm wagon transformed into something festive. At the house, he lifted her down from the wagon seat, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "Tradition says I carry you over the threshold. I've already been living here for months," she pointed out, but she was smiling. "Doesn't matter. You're my wife now. That deserves some ceremony." He carried her up the steps and through the door, setting her down gently in the main room. The house looked the same as always, but it felt different somehow, more complete. Zelda looked around as if seeing it fresh, seeing it as the place where she'd begin her married life. "Nervous?" Lucas asked softly. "A little." She turned to him, "But excited too." He took her hands in his. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. I meant what I said. This moves at your pace." "I know, but Lucas, I'm ready. I want this. I want you." She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face. "I've been ready for weeks. I love you and I trust you and I don't want to wait anymore." He kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring all his love and desire and promise of the future into it. She responded with matching passion, her fingers threading through his hair, her body pressing against his. "My wife," he whispered against her lips. "My beautiful, brilliant wife. My husband." She smiled. "I like the sound of that." He led her to the bedroom they'd share, the room that had been his alone but was now theirs together. The lamp was already lit, casting warm, golden light across the quilt his mother had made, the one he'd saved for special occasions. What followed was tender and sweet, heated and passionate, fumbling in places and perfect in others. Lucas was careful with her, attentive to her responses, determined to make her first time as good as he could. And Zelda, despite her inexperience, gave herself to him with complete trust, discovering pleasure she'd never imagined in his arms. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his arms around her, both of them floating in the aftermath of intimacy. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I'm wonderful." She tilted her face up to his. "That was you were. Everything was wonderful," he laughed softly. "It'll get even better as we learn each other, but I'm glad it was good for you. It was more than good." She traced idle patterns on his chest. "I love you, Lucas." "I love you too, Zelda. So much it scares me sometimes." They talked until sleep claimed them, making plans for the ranch, for the future, for the life they'd build together. And when they finally drifted off, they did so wrapped in each other's arms, two people who'd found their way home. The winter that followed their wedding was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold that kept them close to the house for days at a time. But Lucas and Zelda didn't mind. They used the time to truly become partners, learning each other's rhythms and habits, discovering how to navigate life as a team. Lucas taught Zelda to shoot, patiently coaching her until she could hit a target at 20 paces. "You're a natural," he said proudly after she knocked down 3 cans in a row. "I have a good teacher." She lowered the rifle, turning to smile at him. "Though I hope I never have to use this for anything serious. Hope you don't either. But it's good to know you can defend yourself if you need to." Zelda took over more of the bookkeeping for the ranch, her education proving invaluable as she organized their records and found ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality. Lucas had always been good with animals and land, but numbers on a page made his head ache. Having Zelda handle that side of things freed him to focus on what he did best. In the spring of 1879, they made the decision to expand the ranch. Lucas bought 20 more head of cattle and a bull from a rancher up north, betting that he could build their herd into something substantial. It was a risk, using most of their savings, but Zelda supported him completely. "I believe in you," she told him. "I believe in us. We'll make this work." And they did. By summer, the ranch was thriving. The cattle were healthy, the garden was producing more vegetables than they could eat, and Lucas's reputation for quality stock was growing throughout the territory. One evening in late August, almost exactly a year after they'd met, Zelda came out to where Lucas was mending a fence post. She'd been unusually quiet all day, and he'd been worried she might be feeling ill. "Lucas, I need to tell you something." He set down his hammer, giving her his full attention. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." She took a deep breath, and he saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Lucas couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then joy crashed over him like a wave, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A baby," he said, setting her down carefully, suddenly worried he'd been too rough. "We're having a baby." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Martha confirmed it this afternoon. She thinks the baby will come in late March or early April." Zelda placed her hand over her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" "Happy," he kissed her soundly. "Zelda, I'm over the moon, a child, our child." He pressed his hand over hers on her belly. "You've made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was easy for the most part. Zelda felt sick in the mornings for the first few months, but Lucas was attentive, bringing her crackers and tea in bed, rubbing her back when she felt queasy. As her belly grew, he became even more protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy, that she rest more often. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she told him in exasperation one afternoon when he'd carried in all the firewood himself, despite her offers to help. "I know. But humor me. You're carrying the most precious cargo in the world." She softened at that, as she always did when he said things that revealed the depths of his love for her and their unborn child. "You're going to be an amazing father. I'm going to try." He knelt beside her chair, resting his head against her swollen belly. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I can't wait to meet you." As if in response, the baby kicked, and Lucas's eyes went wide with wonder. It never got old, feeling that life moving beneath his palm, knowing that he and Zelda had created this together. On a cold night in early April 1880, Zelda went into labor. Lucas sent for Martha Sullivan, then paced the floor while the older woman and 2 other ladies from town attended to his wife in the bedroom. Every cry of pain from Zelda made him flinch, made him want to burst through that door and hold her hand, but Martha had firmly told him to stay out and let them work. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. By the time the sun was high in the sky, Lucas had worn a path in the floorboards from his pacing. He'd never felt so helpless in his life, hearing Zelda in pain and not being able to do anything about it. Finally, he heard a sound that stopped his heart, the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. The bedroom door opened and Martha appeared, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. "Congratulations, Lucas. You have a son, a big, healthy boy. A son." The words felt foreign in his mouth, too big to comprehend. "And Zelda, is she all right? She's tired and sore, but she's fine. She's asking for you." He practically ran to the bedroom. Zelda was propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale and exhausted. But she was smiling, and in her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. "Lucas." Her voice was hoarse. "Come meet your son." He crossed to the bed on shaky legs, sitting carefully on the edge so he could see. The baby had a shock of dark hair, a red scrunched face, and tiny fists that waved in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Lucas had ever seen, aside from his mother. "Can I hold him?" Lucas asked. Zelda carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Lucas had held calves and foals, but this was different. This tiny human fit perfectly against his chest, so small and vulnerable and dependent. His son. His and Zelda's. "He's perfect," Lucas said, his voice thick. "You did so well, love. I'm so proud of you. We did well." Zelda reached out to touch the baby's cheek. "What should we name him?" They discussed names over the winter, unable to agree on anything that felt quite right. But looking at his son now, Lucas knew. "What about James, after my father, James William Jensen?" Zelda's tired face lit up. "James." "Yes, I like that. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one." The baby made a small sound, his eyes trying to open, and Lucas felt something in his chest crack wide open. Love, fierce and protective and absolute, flooded through him. He would die for this child, kill for him, move mountains if that's what it took to keep him safe and happy. "Thank you," he said to Zelda, his eyes wet. "Thank you for him, for this, for everything. Thank you for being the kind of man I wanted to have a child with." She settled back against the pillows. "I'm so tired, Lucas." "Sleep, love. I've got him." He stood carefully, cradling James against his chest. "I'll keep watch." And he did. While Zelda slept, Lucas sat in the rocking chair by the window, holding his son, marveling at each tiny feature. The perfect little nose, the shell-like ears, the miniature fingernails. It seemed impossible that something so small could exist, could be real. Martha checked on them before she left, giving Lucas instructions for caring for both mother and baby. "You're a natural," she said, watching him with James. "Some men are afraid to even touch a newborn, but look at you." "I'm terrified I'll break him," Lucas admitted. "You won't. Babies are tougher than they look. Just love him and do your best. That's all any parent can do." The first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting. James was a good baby overall, but he needed to eat every few hours, which meant sleep was scarce. Lucas took over all the household chores, cooking and cleaning while Zelda recovered and fed the baby. At night, he'd bring James to Zelda for feeding, then walk with him afterward, rocking and singing until the baby fell back asleep. "You should rest," Zelda told him one evening, watching him pace with James over his shoulder. "You're going to wear yourself out." "I'm fine. Besides, I like this time with him." It was true. Something about walking in the darkness with his son against his chest, feeling the warm weight of him, hearing the small sounds he made, filled Lucas with a contentment he'd never known before. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a rhythm as a family. James grew quickly, his personality emerging. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. Lucas would take him out to the barn, introducing him to the horses, letting him watch as Lucas worked. "He's too young to understand any of this," Zelda said, amused, as she watched Lucas give James a detailed explanation of fence repair one afternoon. "Maybe. But it's never too early to learn about the ranch. This will all be his someday, his and his siblings." "Siblings?" Zelda raised an eyebrow. "You're already planning more children?" Well, not right this moment, but eventually, yes. I'd like James to have brothers and sisters. I was an only child and it was lonely sometimes. He shifted James to his other arm. But only if you want more. I know how hard the birth was. I do want more. She came to stand beside him, touching James's soft hair. Maybe we'll wait a year or two, let this one get a bit bigger first. But yes, I'd like to give him siblings. In the summer of 1881, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, they were more relaxed about it, knowing what to expect. The pregnancy was similar to the first, and in February of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Grace, after Lucas's mother. Caroline was different from James from the start. Where he'd been content and easy, she was demanding and particular, letting everyone know when she wasn't happy. But she had her father completely wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment he first held her. "My little girl," he'd whispered, looking down at her red, screaming face with absolute adoration. "My beautiful little girl." James, now nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He'd stand by her cradle for long stretches, watching her sleep, bringing her his favorite toys. Lucas would find him trying to share his food with her, not understanding that she couldn't eat solid things yet. "He's going to be a good big brother," Zelda observed, watching James pat Caroline's head with surprising gentleness. "He takes after his mother. Kind heart, gentle nature." Lucas pulled Zelda close, kissing the top of her head. "You've given me everything, you know. A home, a family, a purpose. 5 years ago, I was going through the motions of living. Now I'm actually alive. Funny, I was thinking the same thing." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember the day we met? When I collapsed in Morrison's store? Every detail. The sound you made when you fell, how light you were when I picked you up, the way my heart felt too big for my chest when you opened your eyes. I was so embarrassed, so angry at myself for being weak." She shook her head at the memory. "But now I think maybe I needed to fall so you could catch me. Maybe everything that happened, all the hard parts, they were leading me to you. To us," Lucas corrected. "They were leading us to each other." Life on the ranch continued to prosper. By 1883, Lucas had built their herd to over 100 head of cattle. He'd added more land, more buildings, hired a couple of hands to help with the work. The ranch was becoming one of the most successful in the region, known for quality stock and fair dealing. Zelda's teaching had grown too. What started as a few informal lessons had become a proper school, meeting in the church 3 days a week. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography to children ranging from 5 to 15 years old. The school board had even begun paying her a small salary, acknowledging that the community needed her services. In the fall of 1883, Zelda found herself pregnant again. This time, she was less surprised. She and Lucas had talked about wanting a larger family, and at 27, she felt ready for another child. Lucas, at 34, was as excited as he'd been the first time. 3 children, he marveled one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her growing stomach. "When did we become such a respectable family?" "Respectable?" Zelda laughed. "Is that what we're calling it? Well, we've got the ranch, the children, the standing in the community. I'm on the town council now. You're teaching the next generation. We're practically pillars of society. A far cry from the starving woman who collapsed at your feet and the cowboy who carried her home. Best thing that ever happened to me that day." He leaned over to kiss her. "Best thing by far." Their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas Robert, was born in May of 1884. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with serious dark eyes, rarely crying unless truly distressed. James, now 4, and Caroline, just over 2, were both enchanted by their new brother. The house felt full in the best possible way. There was always noise, always activity, always someone needing something. Lucas thrived on it, coming in from the fields to be mobbed by his children, swinging them around while they shrieked with laughter. Zelda would watch from the doorway, her heart full almost to bursting with love for her chaotic, beautiful family. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were hard years when the cattle prices dropped, when drought threatened the grazing land. There were sleepless nights with sick children, arguments about money and priorities and the 100 small things that married couples navigate. But through it all, Lucas and Zelda held fast to each other, to the foundation they'd built. "We're a team," Lucas would remind her during the tough times. "Whatever comes, we face it together." And they did. In 1886, when a fever swept through Prescott, they nursed all 3 children through it, taking turns sitting up at night, sponging down hot foreheads, coaxing reluctant patients to drink. It was Caroline who scared them the most, her fever spiking dangerously high. But she pulled through, stubborn and fierce like her mother. In 1887, Lucas bought out the neighboring ranch when the elderly owner decided to move east to live with his daughter. It doubled their land and their workload, but it also secured their future, giving them room to expand even more. The children grew. James showed an early aptitude for working with animals, spending hours with his father learning the cattle business. Caroline was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and getting into scrapes that made her mother's hair go prematurely gray. Thomas was the thinker, content with books and quiet observation, reminding Lucas of Zelda at that age. In the spring of 1889, Zelda surprised them all with a 4th pregnancy. At 33, she'd thought she was done having children, but nature had other plans. Lucas was delighted, though worried about her health. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her more tired, more uncomfortable. "Maybe this is our last one," she said one evening, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm not sure I'm up for doing this again after this. Whatever you want, love. We've already been blessed beyond measure." He helped her prop her feet up, massaging her swollen ankles. "Boy or girl, do you think? Girl, I have a feeling." She touched her belly, feeling the baby move. An even split would be nice. She was right. In December of 1889, as the century wound toward its close, Zelda gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth Elizabeth. She was tiny compared to her siblings, arriving 3 weeks early, but she was healthy and loud, making her presence known from the first moment. James was 9 now, old enough to be a real help around the ranch. Caroline was 7, enrolled in her mother's school and already reading at a level well beyond her years. Thomas, at 5, was just starting his formal education, and now there was Ruth, completing their family. The house they'd shared for so long was bursting at the seams. That spring, Lucas added on 2 more rooms, giving each of the children their own space. Zelda created a proper schoolroom in the house for the days when she taught at home, filling it with books and maps and the tools of learning she valued so much. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. "The life you might have had if things had gone differently. If you'd gotten that teaching position in town, maybe married someone with more education, more refinement." Zelda turned to look at him, surprised. "Lucas Jensen, after all these years, you still doubt what we have." "Not doubt exactly. Just wonder sometimes if you settled for less than you deserved." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I didn't settle. I chose. I chose you, I chose this life, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." She gestured to the yard, where James was teaching Thomas how to throw a rope while Caroline ran circles around them with Ruth toddling after her. "Look at what we've built. Not just the ranch, though that's impressive, But this family, this love. You gave me more than any teaching position ever could have. You gave me a home, children, a partnership. You see me, Lucas, all of me, and you love me anyway. I love you because of who you are, not in spite of it. He pulled her closer. And you're right. What we have here, it's special. It's real. The 1890s brought change to Prescott and to the whole Arizona territory. The railroad expanded, bringing more people, more commerce, more connection to the wider world. The town grew, becoming more established, less wild. Lucas and Zelda grew with it, their ranch one of the cornerstones of the local economy. Lucas became known as a fair employer, paying his workers well and treating them with respect. Several of the hands who worked for him had been there for years, becoming almost extensions of the family. Zelda's school had outgrown the church and moved to a proper schoolhouse built by the town, where she taught alongside 2 other teachers. Their children thrived. James, at 12, was already talking about taking over the ranch someday, working alongside his father every day after his schoolwork was done. Caroline discovered she had a gift for drawing, filling page after page with sketches of horses and landscapes and people. Thomas devoured every book he could get his hands on, dreaming of being a lawyer or a doctor. And Ruth, at 3, was the darling of them all, spoiled by parents and siblings alike. In the summer of 1893, Lucas surprised Zelda with a trip. They left the children with Martha Sullivan and her family and took the train to Santa Fe, where they spent a week exploring the old Spanish city, eating in restaurants, walking through art galleries, staying in a hotel that felt impossibly luxurious. "This is wonderful," Zelda said one evening as they walked through the plaza, watching the sunset paint the adobe buildings in shades of rose and gold. "But I miss the children," Lucas laughed. "We've been gone 3 days. I know. Is that terrible? We finally have time alone together, and all I can think about is whether Ruth is remembering to brush her teeth and if James is pushing himself too hard with the work. It's not terrible. It's love." He put his arm around her. "But they're fine, and we deserve this time. When was the last time we had a full night's sleep? When was the last time we had a conversation that didn't involve cattle or children or household logistics?" She leaned into him. "You're right, and I am enjoying this, being with you, just the 2 of us like we used to be. We're not the same people we were back then. No, we're better." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "We've been tested by life and come through stronger. That girl you carried home from Morrison's store, she was lost and alone and scared. The woman I am now, she's found and loved and brave enough to face anything because she knows you're by her side." He kissed her right there in the plaza, not caring who saw, pouring 15 years of love and commitment into it. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "Think the hotel has that big bed waiting for us?" Lucas asked, his eyes dancing with mischief. "I certainly hope so." Zelda took his hand. "Race you back." They ran through the streets of Santa Fe like teenagers, laughing breathlessly, dodging startled pedestrians. By the time they reached the hotel, they were both winded and grinning like fools. The night that followed was theirs alone, a reminder that beneath the roles of parent and rancher and teacher, they were still Lucas and Zelda, still a man and woman deeply in love. The train ride home felt both too long and too short. They were eager to see their children but reluctant to leave the bubble of togetherness they'd created. But when they arrived at the Sullivan house and were mobbed by 4 excited children all talking at once, trying to tell them everything that had happened, Lucas and Zelda shared a look of perfect understanding. This was home. Not the ranch, not the house, but this collection of people they'd created together. Wherever these 6 souls were, that was where they belonged. The years continued to roll past, marked by birthdays and holidays, school performances and cattle drives, quiet evenings on the porch and chaotic family dinners. In 1896, James left home for the first time, spending a year at an agricultural college in California learning modern ranching techniques. Lucas missed him terribly, but was proud of his son's initiative. Caroline, at 14, was growing into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. She'd announced her intention to attend art school back east, a plan that filled Zelda with pride and Lucas with anxiety about his daughter being so far away. Thomas, at 12, was still more interested in books than cattle, but he'd found a passion for veterinary medicine, often assisting Doc Sullivan with sick or injured animals. Lucas had made peace with the fact that Thomas might not take over the ranch, might pursue a different path. And Ruth, at 7, was everyone's sunshine, bright and happy and convinced the whole world was wonderful. In 1898, on a warm August evening, Lucas found Zelda in the garden behind the house. She was sitting on the bench he'd built for her 10th anniversary, looking out at the mountains in the distance. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. "Just thinking about time, how fast it moves." She leaned against him. "It's been 20 years, Lucas. 20 years since I fainted in that store and you carried me home. Best swoon I ever witnessed." He kissed her temple. "Changed my whole life. Mine, too." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you just walked past me? If you decided I wasn't your problem?" "No, because it's not in my nature to walk past someone in need, and I think on some level I knew even then that you were going to be important to me." He took her hand. "I believe in fate, Zelda. I believe we were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. I believe that too." She turned to look at the house, where warm light spilled from the windows and the sounds of their children could be heard. James was home for the summer, his voice the deepest as he argued good-naturedly with Caroline about something. Thomas's laugh rang out, followed by Ruth's giggle. "We've done well, haven't we? We've done better than well. We've built something lasting, something real." He stood, pulling her to her feet. "Come on. Let's go be with our family." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they entered, the noise level increased as all 4 children clamored for attention. Lucas caught Zelda's eye over the chaos and saw his own contentment reflected back at him. This was everything. This was enough. This was more than enough. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. In the summer of 1900, James married a young woman from Flagstaff named Sarah, a sweet-natured girl who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. Lucas and Zelda gained a daughter-in-law, and a year later, their first grandchild, a boy they named Lucas James after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Lucas felt the circle completing itself. He was 52 now, his hair gone gray at the temples, his body bearing the marks of decades of hard work. But his heart was as full as it had ever been. "Your great-grandparents would be so proud," he told tiny Lucas James. "All of them. They'd be proud of the family we've built, the legacy we're creating." Zelda, at 44, was delighted to be a grandmother. She spoiled little Lucas shamelessly, knitting him blankets and clothes, singing him the same songs she'd sung to her own babies. Watching her with their grandson made Lucas fall in love with her all over again. Caroline left for art school in New York in 1901, breaking her father's heart but pursuing her dreams. She wrote long letters home describing the city, the school, the incredible art she was seeing and creating. Lucas kept every letter, rereading them when he missed her too much. Thomas entered veterinary school in 1902, following his passion for healing animals. He was brilliant at it, his gentle nature and quick mind perfect for the profession. He came home on holidays and helped around the ranch, but his future clearly lay in medicine rather than ranching. Ruth, at 13, was still at home, still bringing light to every room she entered. She wanted to be a teacher like her mother, spending hours helping Zelda at the school, natural with children and patient with the slower learners. In 1904, James and Sarah had a second child, a daughter they named Zelda. When they told her the baby's name, Zelda cried, overwhelmed by the honor. "You showed me what it means to be a strong woman," Sarah said, holding the baby out to her mother-in-law, "to be smart and capable and kind. I want our daughter to have those qualities too, and I can't think of a better namesake." Lucas watched his wife cradle their granddaughter and thought his heart might burst. 26 years they'd been married now. 26 years since he'd carried a starving woman out of Morrison's general store and made the decision to help her. It was the best decision he'd ever made. The ranch continued to prosper under James's increasingly capable management. Lucas still worked every day but had started letting his son take on more of the decision-making, preparing for the eventual transition. It wasn't easy, letting go of control, but James had proven himself more than capable. In 1906, Caroline came home from New York with a young man in tow, an art dealer named Robert Foster who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Lucas recognized that look, had seen it in his own mirror for decades. He gave his blessing, and they were married in the fall, surrounded by family and friends. Thomas finished veterinary school in 1907 and opened a practice in Prescott, a small office on Main Street where he treated everything from prize horses to beloved family dogs. He was immediately successful, his skill and compassion making him the most sought-after veterinarian in the territory. Ruth, at 18, had begun teaching at the school alongside her mother. She had a young man courting her, a banker's son named William, and Lucas suspected there'd be another wedding before too long. On a summer evening in 1908, Lucas and Zelda found themselves alone on the porch again. All their children had their own homes now, though they visited often. The house was quieter than it had been in decades, empty in a way that was both peaceful and bittersweet. "Strange, isn't it?" Zelda said. "Spending so many years wishing for 5 minutes of quiet, and now that we have it, I miss the noise. We did good work, you and I." 4 children, all healthy and happy and making their own way in the world, 3 grandchildren and counting. The ranch secure for the next generation. Lucas pulled her close. "Not bad for a starving schoolteacher and a bachelor cowboy," she laughed. "We were quite the pair, weren't we?" "We still are," he kissed her, slow and sweet. "I love you just as much now as I did the day we married. More, maybe, because now I know all your secrets and I love you anyway." "All my secrets?" She raised an eyebrow. "What secrets would those be? That you snore when you sleep on your back? That you're terrified of spiders but won't admit it? That you cry at weddings even when you don't know the couple?" He touched her face gently. "That you gave up your dreams of adventure and education to marry a simple rancher, and you've never once made me feel like it was a sacrifice." "It wasn't a sacrifice, Lucas. It was a choice, and the right one." She covered his hand with hers. "You've given me more adventure and education than any book or school ever could. You've taught me about love and partnership and what it means to build a life with someone. Any dreams I might have had pale in comparison to what we've created together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they'd watched for 30 years. The land stretched out before them, land they'd worked and tended and passed on to the next generation. The house behind them held memories of laughter and tears, of ordinary days and extraordinary moments, of a family grown and nurtured and loved. You remember what you said to me that first day? Zelda asked. When I asked why you were helping me, I said a lot of things that first day. You said that in this world, we don't get many chances to do something decent, and picking me up off that floor was your chance. She turned to look at him. But Lucas, you've spent every day since then doing decent things. Raising our children with kindness, treating your workers fairly, being a good neighbor and friend. That one moment in Morrison's store wasn't your only chance at decency. It was the beginning of a lifetime of it. His eyes were wet. You make me sound better than I am. I describe you exactly as you are. A good man who does good things without thinking about it, without needing praise or recognition. She kissed him softly. My good man. In 1909, Ruth married William in a beautiful ceremony at the church. Lucas walked his youngest daughter down the aisle, remembering the day she was born, the tiny baby who'd completed their family. Now she was starting a family of her own, the cycle continuing. That same year, Caroline and Robert welcomed their first child, and Thomas got engaged to a lovely woman named Margaret who worked as a teacher at the school. The family continued to grow, to branch out, to evolve. Lucas turned 61 in 1909, and Zelda turned 53. They were getting older, their bodies slower than they'd once been, but their hearts were young. Lucas still rode out with James to check the cattle, though not as far or as long as he used to. Zelda still taught 3 days a week, her passion for education undiminished. On an August evening in 1910, exactly 32 years after they'd met, Lucas and Zelda hosted a party at the ranch. All 4 children came, bringing spouses and grandchildren. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running through rooms, adults catching up, babies being passed from arm to arm. Lucas stood on the porch watching it all, a sense of deep satisfaction settling over him. This was his legacy, not just the ranch or the land, but these people. These connections, these relationships, this love. Zelda came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. He squeezed her hand. Mostly how grateful I am that you fainted at my feet all those years ago. She laughed, the sound as bright as it had been when she was 22. Best fainting spell I ever had. Come on. He pulled her toward the door. Let's go be with our family. They stepped into the house together, into the warmth and light and love, into the life they'd built from a single moment of need and kindness. Around them, their children and grandchildren talked and laughed, secure in the knowledge that they were loved, that they belonged, that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Years later, when Lucas was 70 and Zelda was 62, they would sit on that same porch and talk about their lives. They would remember the young people they'd been, the journey they'd taken, the obstacles they'd overcome. They would marvel at how one decision, one moment of compassion had changed everything. Their grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how they met, of the day Grandma fainted from hunger at Morrison's general store and Grandpa carried her home. It would become family legend, a story told and retold, the foundation myth of the Jensen clan. But to Lucas and Zelda, it was never just a story. It was their beginning, the first chapter of a love story that spanned decades, weathered storms, and produced a family they were both immensely proud of. It was proof that sometimes the worst moments of your life lead to the best ones, that kindness matters, that love can grow from the smallest seeds. On a warm spring evening in 1918, Lucas and Zelda sat together on their porch, their hands intertwined, their hearts still beating in rhythm after 40 years of marriage. The ranch sprawled before them, now run entirely by James and his sons, but still their home, still their legacy. I would do it all again, Zelda said softly. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge, I would choose you every single time. And I would always carry you home," Lucas replied, his voice steady despite his age. "From that store, from anywhere, from the ends of the earth. You're my home, Zelda. You always have been." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun set together. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful from it. The life they'd created, the family they'd raised, the love they'd shared. It was more than either of them had ever dared to dream of that long-ago day in Morrison's general store. And as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant colors, Lucas Jensen and Zelda Jensen sat together in perfect contentment, knowing they had lived fully, loved completely, and left a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their story had begun with a fainting spell and a cowboy's kindness. It had grown into something remarkable, something lasting, something true. And though the years would eventually claim them both, their love would live on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values forward. In the end, it was a simple story, really. A story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built a life together through hard work and determination and unwavering devotion. A story that proved love could bloom in the most unexpected places, that kindness could change lives, that sometimes falling down was the first step toward rising higher than you ever thought possible. It was their story, and it was complete.